It's strange how some stories from our parents' childhood stick with us more than others. This one came from my dad, and even though he never outright admitted how much it scarred him, you can still hear it in his voice whenever he talks about that night. He was about 10 years old. It was one of those quiet evenings where the house felt too big and too empty. His parents had stepped out, leaving him alone for just an hour or two. Nothing unusual, at least not at first. He had the living room to himself, a modest space furnished with heavy curtains, a worn couch, and the bulky television that was considered modern back then. He settled in front of the TV, half distracted by the dim orange glow of the streetlight sneaking in through the curtains. That's when it happened. The screen went black. Just silence. He frowned, shuffled off the couch, and twisted the dial to bring the picture back. A flicker, then the TV buzzed to life again. He shrugged. It was an old set, and glitches weren't anything new. But no more than a minute later, click, darkness again. This time, the sound of the TV switching off was sharper, like someone had deliberately pressed a button. He got up again, muttering to himself, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. When the screen lit up a second time, the silence of the house felt heavier, pressing against his ears. He sat back down, forcing himself to laugh at how ridiculous it was to be unnerved by a TV. And then, click, the screen went black again. He stared at it for a moment, motionless. His hands felt clammy. There was no draft, no flickering light bulb, no reason for the television to keep shutting off so precisely, so deliberately. He stood slower this time, his heartbeat picking up. He turned the TV back on again, the static and voices of the program filling the air like a fragile lifeline. And then, once more, it cut out. Now panic began to set in. His eyes darted around the room. Maybe the remote. His dad usually left it on the coffee table. He looked, but it wasn't there. He checked under the table, then the rug, then near the armchair. Nothing. His small footsteps carried him toward the corner of the living room, where another couch was pushed against the wall. The shadows pooled darker there, thick and almost too still, and as he leaned down to look, his breath caught. There, crouched in the corner, was a man, a stranger. His clothes looked wrinkled. His hair was long and wild, hanging in greasy strands that covered part of his face, but not enough to hide his expression. He was smiling, and in his hand, the missing TV remote. The man didn't lunge. He didn't speak. He simply stared back at my dad, eyes unblinking, mouth curled, in that unnatural grin, slowly, with a deliberate slowness that felt more threatening than a shout. He lifted his finger and pressed the remote again. Click. The room was swallowed in darkness as the TV died once more. That was all my dad needed. His legs moved before his brain could catch up. He bolted for the front door, yanking it open with trembling hands, and sprinting across the street to a neighbor's house. His voice cracked as he screamed for help, loud enough to draw more than one curtain back in the neighborhood. The neighbors called the police, ushering him inside, their eyes wide as he sobbed out what he saw. When the police arrived, the man was still there, still in the living room, still holding the remote as if waiting for my dad to return. They arrested him. The details were murky, whether he was homeless, mentally unstable, or something worse. My dad never got clear answers, and maybe that made it harder, because the truth is, what frightened him wasn't just the man himself. It was the fact that someone had been there all along, hidden in his house, silently toying with him, watching him with that smile. And sometimes, even Sometimes the smallest twist of fate can mean the difference between safety and something unspeakable. This story belonged to my friend who was about 8 or 9 years old at the time. She told me she still thinks about it whenever she walks home alone. It was an ordinary weekday afternoon. The air smelled faintly of cut grass, the neighborhood quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. She was walking back from school, her little backpack bouncing against her shoulders, the key to her house clutched tightly in her hand. Her mother worked late most days, so she was used to letting herself in. That routine felt normal by then, walking the same cracked sidewalk, climbing the familiar steps to the front porch, sliding the key into the lock. Safe, predictable. But that day was different. As she reached the porch, she slipped the key from her pocket and stretched her arm toward the door. Before the key touched the lock, the door swung open. Her mother stood there in a pale dressing gown, her face tired, her eyes heavy with the remnants of sickness. She had left work early, too unwell to continue her shift. But instead of smiling, instead of saying her name in relief, her mother's face hardened. Her eyes weren't on her daughter at all. They were focused past her, on the walkway. In a sharp, urgent voice, she said,
"Who are you?"
Confused, my friend froze, her heart skipping. Slowly, she turned her head to follow her mother's gaze. Standing just a few feet behind her was a man. He was tall, wrapped in a long, dark coat that swayed slightly in the breeze. His face was half hidden under the shadow of the collar, but what she could see was pale, sharp, and wrong. His eyes locked on her, expression unreadable. For a second, nobody moved. She was caught between her mother's voice and the stranger's silence, her body unable to decide which direction to run. Then, as if startled by her mother's sudden appearance, the man's posture changed. Without a word, he turned sharply, his coat snapping with the movement, and hurried down the path. His footsteps echoed against the pavement, quicker and quicker, until he vanished into the street and was gone. For a second, nobody moved. She was caught between her mother's voice and the stranger's silence, her body unable to decide which direction to run. Her mother pulled her inside instantly, slamming the door shut and locking it, her own hands trembling. The two of them stood there in the hallway, hearts pounding, trying to understand what had almost just happened. It was only later, once the shock faded, that the truth really sank in. If her mother hadn't come home sick that day, if she hadn't been there at that exact moment to open the door, her daughter might have walked straight into the house with that man right behind her, and no one would have been there to stop him. To this day, my friend says she can still picture the way that coat swayed as he turned away, and the sick feeling in her stomach when she realized he'd been standing so close, waiting for her to open the door. Some houses hold secrets you don't realize until it's too late. Jacob told me about something he swore he'll never forget, something that changed the way his family looked at their home forever. It was late one evening. Dinner had just ended and the family was scattered around the small house. Jacob was only a kid back then, full of restless energy, but tired enough to want to sink into the couch. The living room was unusually quiet that night. No TV, no music, just the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. He sat there in silence, letting his eyes wander. The house had always been modest, but it carried a heaviness at night, as though shadows settled deeper into the corners than they should. That's when his gaze landed on the door to the empty room at the end of the hallway. The room itself was used for storage, and no one really went in there. The door was cracked open just slightly, revealing only darkness inside. But as Jacob stared, something caught his attention. shadow. But no, it was pale, long, and it moved, ever so slightly, curling around the wood like it was gripping it. His breath caught in his throat. The finger was too big, too thick, too long. It didn't belong to anyone he knew. Jacob let out a scream so sharp it made his chest hurt. His father rushed in instantly, grabbing him before he could even explain. Jacob pointed down the hallway, his finger trembling as he stuttered out what he saw. The father didn't hesitate. He yanked Jacob off the couch and pulled him toward the door, shouting for Jacob's mother. Within seconds, the family was rushing out of the house into the night air. They didn't stop running until they reached the nearest gas station, where they sat in the harsh glow of the fluorescent lights, hearts racing, waiting until Jacob's grandmother arrived in her truck. Only later, when Jacob calmed down enough to speak, did he describe what he had seen. He told his father the finger looked wrong, almost cartoonish in its proportions, like a foam finger you'd find at a baseball game, except it was real, flesh and bone. It had wrapped so far around the frame that it looked impossible. His father went back once with police to check the house. Nothing had been stolen, nothing seemed broken, but one thing stood out. The window in that empty room was wide open. It was as though something had let itself in, or worse, was waiting inside the whole time. After they gathered their belongings a few days later, they never stayed in that house again. It sat abandoned, carrying with it the memory of that single, unnatural image, a pale finger gripping a door frame, belonging to someone or something that never should have been there. When you're a child, your bedroom is supposed to feel like the safest place in the world. 4 walls, a door you can close, a window that only lets in the moonlight. For me, that illusion shattered one night, and I still think about the face I woke up to. I was maybe 10 or 11 at the time. My bedroom was upstairs, tucked at the end of the hallway. I remember the comfort of falling asleep to the faint sound of crickets outside and the occasional creak of the house settling. Nothing unusual. That night I drifted into sleep easily, but sometime after midnight I stirred. Maybe it was a change in the air, maybe it was instinct. Something pulled me out of my dreams. I opened my eyes, and there he was, a man leaning over me, his face inches from mine, staring directly into my eyes. For a moment, my brain refused to believe what I was seeing. My body froze in a kind of primal terror. Then instinct finally took over. I let out the highest pitched scream I think I've ever produced and bolted upright, trying to run. As I scrambled for the door, I felt his hand swipe across my shoulder. He tried to grab me. My skin crawled at the thought of those fingers closing around me, but somehow, by pure adrenaline, I slipped out of his reach. I tore open my bedroom door and sprinted down the hallway, my feet pounding against the wooden floor. I crashed into my parents' room, sobbing and gasping out what had just happened. My dad shot upright instantly. He didn't even hesitate. From under his bed, he pulled out the old baton he kept for protection and charged toward my room. I stayed clinging to my mom, heart hammering, ears ringing, with my own scream. But by the time my dad reached my room, the man was gone. The only trace was the window, wide open, curtains fluttering in the night breeze. The police believed he had jumped onto the patio roof and disappeared into the yard. To this day, I don't know how he got in. There were no broken locks, no forced entry, just that open window, as though he'd been waiting for the right moment. What haunts me most isn't the open window, though. It isn't even the fact that he escaped. It's the memory of waking up was adjusting to the dark and realizing there was another face already waiting, watching, inches from mine. Sometimes when I try to sleep, I remember that moment, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up at all. When you're a kid, family trips are supposed to be filled with laughter, relaxation, and warm memories. But for me, one particular weekend at the beach turned into a memory I'll never escape. I was about 12 or 13 when my mom, my stepdad, and our 2 dogs decided to take a short vacation. We rented a small apartment near the far end of the shore. From the outside, it looked ordinary, the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. We carried our bags in, unpacked, and immediately headed out for dinner. By the time we returned, night had settled over the coastline. The air smelled of salt and distant bonfire smoke from other beachgoers. Inside, the apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, though I didn't think much of it then. After watching some TV with my parents, they set up their pull-out bed in the living room with the dogs curled up beside them. I was given the bedroom with a king-sized bed all to myself. For most kids, that would have felt like a treat. For me, it would become a curse. I stayed up for a while tapping away at my computer. With no internet, I stuck to the games I had pre-installed. The glow of the screen painted the walls in pale light while the rest of the apartment slept. Around midnight, exhaustion finally caught up with me. I shut the laptop, climbed into the large bed, and listened as silence swallowed the room. It wasn't the natural kind of silence you expect at night. It felt heavier, pressing against my ears as if the air itself was waiting. 5 minutes passed, maybe less, and then I heard it. A sigh. Not a faint one, not something you could confuse with the pipes or the wind. It was loud, human. It came from inside the room. My entire body froze. My eyes darted around the dark space, searching for any sign of movement. My parents were in the living room with the door shut. The dogs were asleep with them. There was no one else who could have made that sound. The sigh came again, slow and deliberate, like someone standing only a few feet away, exhaling just to let me know they were there. I couldn't stay. I leapt from the bed, ripped the door open, and ran. My bare feet slapped against the cold tile floor as I bolted down the hallway and into another room, across from the master bedroom. I slammed the door shut behind me, heart pounding, so loud it drowned out everything else. That night, I didn't close my eyes once. I stayed curled under the covers, staring at the door, waiting for it to creak open, but it never did. In the morning, when I told my parents, they dismissed it, said I'd been tired or imagining things, but I knew the truth. I hadn't imagined it. I heard it clear as day. That sigh was real, and to this day, whenever I'm in an unfamiliar bedroom at night, I find myself holding my breath, listening, just to make sure I'm not about to hear that same sound again. There's something deeply unsettling about being watched, especially when you're sure no one should be there. I'll never forget the night I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. It happened at a friend's house after a long night of drinks. I wasn't exactly sober, stumbling a little as I made my way upstairs to clean up before crashing. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels thick, almost heavy. I splashed warm water onto my face, blinking at myself in the bathroom mirror when I felt it. That sensation of being watched. At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just the alcohol, making me paranoid. But then I noticed it. Movement in my peripheral vision. The bathroom door was half open, and in the narrow gap, an eye was staring at me. For a second, my body froze. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't like seeing a shadow or a trick of the light. This was unmistakable. The whites of the eye, the way it focused directly on me. I let out a loud scream, stumbling backward in my drunken panic. I hit the floor hard, the tiles cold against my back. By the time I scrambled to my feet and looked again, the eye was gone. Heart pounding, I stumbled into the hallway and called out, "Mike?" My friend's voice came back, muffled but clear, from the kitchen downstairs. It couldn't have been him. I never heard footsteps on the stairs. I asked again just to be sure. "Mike, were you up here?" His voice carried back, "No, man, I've been down here the whole time." Every part of me wanted to bolt right out the front door, but the alcohol made me sluggish, and eventually I convinced myself. Maybe I was just seeing things. Maybe it was the drinking. I dragged myself to the guest bedroom, collapsed onto the bed, and pulled the covers halfway over me. The mattress felt like it swallowed me whole. I barely remember closing my eyes before slipping into unconsciousness. I don't know how long I was asleep before I woke. The pounding in my head was immediate, the familiar hangover creeping in. The room was cold, far colder than it should have been, and one of my feet had slipped out from under the blanket, dangling over the edge of the bed. That's when I felt it, something icy cold wrapped around my foot, not just touching, gripping. At first I thought maybe it was the blanket shifting, but then it moved, slowly, up and down as though stroking my skin. My entire body stiffened. I was too terrified to even pull my leg back. And then, from the darkness, right next to the bed, came a voice, raspy, broken, barely human. "Can you help me?" The words slid into my ear like poison. That was enough. I screamed, not caring how loud, and bolted upright. My legs carried me out of that bed, through the door, and down the hallway before I even realized I was moving. I didn't stop until I reached the living room, where Mike stared at me like I'd lost my mind. To this day, I don't know who or what was upstairs with me that night, but I know I'll never forget the feeling of that cold grip on my skin, and the voice that asked for help. There's a reason. People say you should never open the door at night, in the middle of nowhere. I learned that lesson one winter, when a weekend getaway with friends turned into something far darker than we expected. We had rented a small cabin deep in the woods, surrounded by nothing but trees and snow-covered fields. The storm outside that night was brutal, snow whipping sideways against the windows, wind howling like an animal. Inside, the fire crackled weakly, the warmth not quite keeping the cold from creeping in. It was some time after midnight when the first knock came. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. A soft, deliberate thump against the door. My friends were all upstairs asleep, so I sat there in silence, staring at the entrance. A moment later, it came again. Louder, my heart picked up. In the back of my mind, I told myself maybe someone was in trouble, maybe a hiker caught in the storm, desperate for shelter. That thought made me stand up. I tiptoed over to the door, each step crunching softly against the old wooden floorboards. I paused, listening. Then the knocking came again, this time frantic, urgent. "Who is it?" I called out. No answer. I called louder, still nothing. And then silence. I waited a long closed the door, walked away, but curiosity got the best of me. Against my better judgment, I slid the chain off, opened the door wide, and stepped outside. That's when I saw them. Footprints, fresh tracks pressed deep into the snow, leading away from the cabin. Without thinking, I pulled on my boots and jacket, the cold biting instantly at my skin, and stepped out into the storm. The snowflakes stung my face as I followed the tracks across the yard. Each step felt heavier, as if the storm itself was trying to drag me back inside. The prints led all the way to the edge of the property, and then they stopped. Just stopped. No vehicle, no broken tree branches, no drag marks. It was like the person who made them had simply ceased to exist right there in the snow. A chill worse than the storm ran down my spine. I turned and bolted back to the cabin, my boots crunching loud, my breath ragged in the icy air. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pressed my back against it, trying to steady my pulse. But before I could even gather my thoughts, the knocking started again, this time harder, louder. The whole frame of the cabin shook with each blow. Panic ripped through me. I screamed for my friends, my voice cracking. One by one, they rushed down the stairs, rubbing their eyes, asking what was wrong. We stood there, all of us, staring at the door, as the pounding continued, rattling through the wood. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. The footprints had ended at the edge of the property. Whoever was knocking now hadn't left any at all. There are moments when fear doesn't creep in slowly. It slams into you all at once. That's what happened the night my friend and I stayed at her family's old country house. It was one of those isolated properties. No neighbors, no streetlights, no cell reception. The kind of place where once the sun went down, the world outside turned into nothing but blackness. We told ourselves it would be fun, an adventure away from the city. But we were wrong. It started with the back door. I knew I had locked it. I can still remember hearing the click of the latch earlier in the evening. But when we came back inside, it was open, wide open. The winter wind howled through the frame, making the curtains flutter. My friend asked if I'd shut it properly. My chest tightened, but I didn't want to scare her, so I lied. I told her maybe I'd forgotten. We decided to distract ourselves with food, heading into the kitchen. I was rummaging in the cabinets, when suddenly my friend sprinted out of the kitchen and tackled me in the hallway, eyes wide with terror. She swore she'd heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, circling the house. We froze. No cell reception, no neighbors, just us, sitting in the hallway with the faint wind rattling against the windows. And then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of the back door being forced, the handle jiggling, the frame shuddering. Someone was trying to get in. Panic rose like fire in my chest. We had to leave. We grabbed our things in a frenzy, not even bothering to pack them properly, just clutching armfuls of clothes and bags. At the front door, we hesitated. My hand was on the knob when a deafening bang echoed from the backyard, like someone had slammed something heavy against the wall. And then came the sound of birds, hundreds of them, screeching, flapping, exploding into the night sky, as if something had disturbed them all at once. That was it. We yanked open the door and bolted. We ran to the car, throwing ourselves inside with our belongings, still piled on our laps. My hands shook as I jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine roared, headlights cutting through the black. As we reversed down the driveway, I caught movement in the rearview rearview mirror, a figure was sprinting up the side of the house, moving fast, too fast, straight toward us. I hit the gas. Gravel sprayed behind us as we tore down the road, hearts slamming in our chests. We didn't stop until the house was far behind, swallowed by darkness. That night, neither of us slept. Even now, I don't like to think about what would have happened if we'd stayed 1 minute longer. When you're a child, basements are already terrifying. They're cold, they're dark, and they feel like places where things hide. But when I was 10, the fear I felt in my family's basement became something real, something I've carried with me ever since. That weekend, our parents were repainting our bedrooms, so my little brother Ben and I had to sleep downstairs. He was barely a year old, still in diapers, while I was just old enough to think I could handle being the big brother. My parents set up the pull-out couch for us in the basement, tossed us a couple of blankets, and told us it was only for one night. The basement was unfinished. Cement floors, exposed pipes, and a single hanging light bulb that flickered whenever the wind rattled the old house. It smelled of damp earth and dust. At first, it felt like an adventure. We played with toys, whispered jokes, and listened to the muffled sounds of our parents moving around upstairs. Eventually, Ben fell asleep, his tiny breaths even and steady. I lay there next to him, staring up at the low ceiling beams. That's when I heard it, a faint scrape. It echoed across the basement, sharp against the silence. I froze, holding my breath, waiting. A few seconds passed before it came again, a dragging sound, like something heavy shifting across the concrete floor. I turned toward Ben. He was still asleep, curled up against the blanket. It wasn't him. I whispered out a shaky, "Hello," but my voice cracked. No response. Then, from the corner where the shadows pooled darkest, something moved. I could make out a shape, crouched low, its outline jagged and wrong. At first I thought it was furniture, but then it shifted, slowly, too slowly. Its arm stretched out, impossibly long, scraping against the floor. As it dragged itself forward, my stomach flipped, my body locked. I wanted to scream for my parents, but my voice died in my throat. The figure leaned, its head cocking in a way no humans should. I swear, I saw the faint glint of eyes in the dark, watching me, unblinking. I snapped the blanket over my head, my heart slamming so hard, I thought it would burst. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, listening to the faint scrape, growing quieter, then stopping completely. When morning light finally reached the basement windows, I dared to peek out. The corner was empty, just shadows and dust. But I know what I saw. I've never gone back into that basement since, and I never will. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. Which story chilled you the most? Comment below. And don't forget, subscribe for more terrifying true encounters every week. Until next time, stay